For joining us tonight for the Courage California 2022 General Election Power Hour. I'm Irene Gowing, the Executive Director of Courage California. And just a quick note, as you may have noted just right there, that we are recording tonight's session and live streaming as well. So as is tradition for our events, I want to open tonight's Power Hour with an Indigenous land acknowledgement. Courage California acknowledges our presence on the traditional and unceded territory of hundreds of First Nations who are the traditional caretakers of this land we call California. As visitors on this land, we pay our respects to the ancestors, elders, relatives, and future generations. And also this evening, I want to thank our guest speakers, and I especially also want to thank, you'll see Dresden Lamar and Gabi Cerda from Pro Bono ASL for providing ASL interpretation for tonight. So before we get started, just want to mention really quickly, we're going to cover a lot. As you know, ballots are out. Some of you may have already gotten your ballots in. So we're going to cover a few races, a few ballot measures, and we're also going to talk about our polling project as well. So throughout this, there's going to be a lot of information. We'll share some resources, and we want to make sure that you all have a chance to also get your questions answered about the ballot. Because as you've seen, it's long. We only have 7 statewide ballot measures, but I know, speaking for me as a resident of Oakland, California, there were plenty of local and county level ballot measures as well. So lots to get through on our ballot. So with that, I just want to mention that we are going to have questions and answer sections at a couple times during the night. So first time will be after we share some of the results of our polling project. And then towards the end, after we've heard from some of our speakers who are going to speak about some of the ballot measures and races on the ballot. So at any time, please feel free to chat your questions in the chat. Or once we get to the Q&A section too, you can use under the reactions part in the Zoom menu, there is a function for you to raise your hand. So once we get to Q&A, you can also raise your hand as well. So with that, as you all know, we are now 3 weeks away from the November 8th election day. So you've seen the news, it's all over, people are talking about it. A lot is at stake on this ballot. So of course, top of mind for a lot of people, Democratic control of the House. So here in California, we are seeing possibilities from up to 8 or 9 races to potentially flip from Republican to Democratic to hold the House. Also, we're going to see abortions on the ballot, both literally in terms of having Prop 1 to enshrine abortion into the California state constitution, and also as a key deciding issue on several races and between several candidates. And we also have the ability to make really significant headway on our carbon emission reduction goals with Prop 30. As always, too, this ballot, we're going to have the chance to elect more progressive champions into our state legislature. And of course, as I mentioned before, lots of local races and ballot measures to weigh in as well. I mean, just in LA, we've got the mayoral race, several city council races, which of course are even more in the spotlight now, given what's happened with the LA City Council in the last couple of weeks. But in LA County, you've also got the sheriff's race and also Measure A to give the Board of Supervisors the power to terminate the sheriff of cause. And we'll talk about that ballot measure today. So in each of these races and ballot measures, there are some really clear choices to make that will set us on very different pathways, both at the local level and at the state level, and certainly at the federal and national level. And we are going to be able to make these choices based on top issues. So as I mentioned, environmental justice, abortion, and reproductive rights, but also we know top of mind is jobs in the economy right now and healthcare as well. So with that, we want to launch a poll with this power hour. So just want to know for you, as you are thinking about your ballot and sort of considering what races and how to vote on ballot measures, what issue is top of mind for you as you decide who or what to vote for on your November 8th ballot? So there's jobs in the economy, housing costs, public safety, the environment, abortion and reproductive rights. Let us know in the chat what issue is sort of what you think of as sort of like the main deciding factor as you think about who and what's on your ballot. And then while folks sort of answer that in the chat, I also want to give you a quick rundown of who we're going to be hearing from and what we're going to be covering tonight. So first, as I mentioned, we had a polling project in partnership with Data for Social Good. And so Professor Lisa Garcia Bedoya will join us to talk about that project. We also have Black Women for Wellness Action Project with us to talk about Proposition 1. We also have Vinny from the Yes on Los Angeles County Measure A campaign that I just mentioned. And then we also have Sky from Inland Empire United to talk about a key assembly race in the Inland Empire. We also have folks from the Courage team. Those are my kids in the background. The Courage team will also talk about some of the information and resources that we have for you voters for this election as well. So keep chatting in here what some of the top issues are that you are thinking about as you think about your ballot. And with that, speaking of polls, I want to just quickly give an introduction as we talk about our congressional polling. So Courage has actually been doing polls and focus groups since fall of 2020. And that's for us to better understand how voters, and especially young voters, how they get information about politics, how they plan to vote, and what issues they care most about. And in this cycle for this 2022 general election, we are partnering with Communities for a New California in the Central Valley, IU United, who is with us on the call today, OC Action, and Data for Social Good, as I mentioned. And we conducted polls in 6 key flip congressional districts in Central Valley, Inland Empire, Orange County, and Los Angeles. So for those of you keeping track by district numbers, that's 13, 21, 22, 27, 41, and 45. So with that, to speak more about our polling results, I'd like to introduce Professor Lisa Garcia Bedoya, one of the nation's foremost political engagement experts, Data for Social Good, co-founder and Courage board member, who will share about the polling results. Welcome, Professor Bedoya.
Thank you so much, Irene. Let's hope I can present. So as Irene said, I'm going to go pretty quickly, but we have a quick moment for Q&A. So you can ask questions. So if you can keep your questions. So this is an overview of the poll we did. Again, these results are just for these 6 congressional districts. So this is not the whole state of California. We had a sample of 3,432 folks. We polled in English, Spanish, Tagalog, Korean, and Vietnamese. We had pretty good representation, but it's getting harder and harder to get people to answer polls. And so that's one of the challenges you should keep in mind whenever you're looking at polls this cycle. In terms of top 3 issues, so in the Valley, again, half of our districts were in the Valley, half of our districts were in Southern California. In the Valley, jobs, definitely the biggest issue, and safety, and everywhere except for CD13, which is in the Bay Area. Not surprisingly, you had housing as a big concern. In our Southern California districts, you had, again, jobs and public safety were the top 2. And then you had abortion in 27 and 41, and healthcare, which we saw also was important to folks in the Valley. So jobs pretty consistently the issue across these districts. The big story is how many people are undecided. Not surprisingly, we found a lot of people are not paying attention, both in Southern California and in the Valley. Fewer people are paying attention in Southern California, at least according to their responses. And so then, given people aren't paying attention, folks aren't talking to them, they're not ready to say who they want to vote for. And Latinos, especially Latinos and Asian Americans, you'll see here in the LA districts, and then a similar story of what's happening in the Valley, but with just higher proportions overall of people saying that they're undecided. And so while we understand that this is an important election, I think what this tells us is that folks aren't getting information, they aren't seeing ads, they aren't being brought in to what's happening in this particular election. Women said were more likely to say that they were undecided than men. This has actually been suggested is a gender effect, that men, because for socialization reasons, not because they're men, but people who self-identify as men are less likely to say, I don't know, on a survey. But these differences are pretty big. So again, just thinking about who in our communities is being reached out to and talked to about politics is important. And then, not so surprisingly, folks on the younger end of the scale, this is 18 to 45, so not super young, but people who were on the lower end of the scale in terms of age tended to say that they were undecided as well. And so also highly likely to say that they weren't paying attention to the election. And so we did ask folks if you had to choose a candidate. So even those people who said that they didn't know who necessarily to vote for in these districts, all as Irene said, all of which are battlegrounds and therefore competitive, said that it really was the issues that the candidate represented that would decide their vote. Our other category for this slide includes a candidate's track record, their party identification, name recognition, or whether they've been contacted in the past. And so I think it really speaks to voters' hunger for real information about the candidates that are running and the lack of that kind of substantive engagement in what the candidates stand for that most voters want and aren't getting from the current advertising process that candidates are doing. I know people are interested in the ballot initiatives, so just quickly, Proposition 1 looks like we would say, and again, these are only 6 districts, but 27 specifically, that's the northern part of LA County, pretty conservative area. The fact that 55% of voters are saying that they're in favor of ballot initiative number 1 makes us feel fairly confident that in fact it will pass. For folks who don't know, the language of the ballot is here. This is the reproductive freedom ballot initiative. And just to give a snapshot of who's supporting this initiative, we have, by party, not surprisingly, you have Democrats much more likely to support than Republicans. But over here, looking at people with no party preference, the majority, strong majority supporting the initiative, I think suggests that it will pass. You don't have a huge difference by race, but still have people who self-identified as whites a little bit less likely than other ethno-racial groups to say that they supported the initiative. And you have more women than men saying that they support the initiative. And the biggest difference is here along age, 18 to 29-year-olds overwhelmingly likely to say that they support Proposition 1. Sorry, there's a delay in my, uh-oh. You never like it when your computer talks back to you while you're making a presentation. Give me a second to, I think it froze. Can folks still hear me?
Yeah, yes. We can still hear you.
Uh-oh. I'm hitting escape and it's not, here we go. Sorry, everyone, technical difficulties. My apologies. Here we go. The other proposition we were going to talk about was Prop 30, which I'm really hoping I can share with you. My computer's had a hard day, everyone. That is not the slide that I wanted us to be looking at. I'm gonna run through and see if maybe it will let me get to where we were. Here we go, close. There, can everyone see Prop 30? My screen just went white. Okay.
No, I only see the ASO.
I'm gonna stop sharing and just tell you what we found for Prop 30. Pretty much we would say, so the support for Prop 30 was under 50% in every district and was definitely lower across the board. It was down to 37% in District 27. So we would suggest that the decision on what happens with Prop 30 is really going to come down to the undecideds, the many people who said they're not sure whether they would support it. There's a much bigger partisan gap with Prop 30. You have 71% of Democrats and 16% compared to 16% of Republicans saying they support it. And then the independent, no party preference folks are at 41%. And so a big difference. For folks who don't know what Prop 30 is, it's the increases in tax on personal income over $2 million. And so this also has a race story. People who self-identified as white were the least likely by far to say they supported this initiative. Women and men seem pretty split. And young people are much more likely to say Yes, I'm sorry, Joan. I hope I gave you the information that you needed on Prop 30. Young people are more likely to say that they support the initiative. So with that, I hope if people have point of information, questions, please let me know, and any other questions about the polling.
Thank you, Professor Bedoya. If you could also, can you give folks a sense too of who was more likely to respond to the polls, and what do you even infer from that? Because I know a lot of folks care most about like young voters, undecided voters, like right around election time, but aren't necessarily investing in those folks or engaging those folks beyond that. So I'm really curious, what do you even make of that part of the poll?
Yeah, so in general, whenever you're looking at polling, you should really look at both their methodology and then what the breakout was by race and by age, and ideally by class if they have it. So our poll was going to be a 100% online poll. We've been doing these polls for about 10 years now. The response rates are getting lower and lower, especially after the pandemic. And so we supplemented with phone calling for folks who didn't have emails in the voter file in order to try to get more robust samples for each congressional district. In general, young people are less likely to respond. Latinx voters are less likely to respond. Immigrant voters are less likely to respond, even though we did provide in-language questionnaires. And so it's just getting more difficult, and this is true for voter contact as well. It's just getting more difficult to engage with people, to find ways to access people, and for them to trust giving you their information. I think there's a lot of cynicism about the reasons for these polls. I know I've gotten a lot of requests for polls during this election cycle. And so even with an incentive, which we provide, it's just getting more and more difficult to contact people. And so that's why polling always has to be taken with a bit of a grain of salt. The last soapboxy thing I'll say is that our poll is weighted for registered voters. It's not weighted toward likely voters. Most polling firms around election time wait for likely voters, and that can create distortions because they don't necessarily know who the likely voters are going to be. They make that judgment based on people's answers to questions about how likely they are to vote. And we know people have different propensities by race and by gender to say that, answer that question yes. They also base their weighting on who voted the last time. And so if there's going to be a big shift in voters, that's what happened in 2016. The folks that people expected to turn out weren't the folks that turned out. And so the weighting was off, which meant that the answers were off. And in a close race, that can make a big difference. So I hope that helped a little bit.
Yes, thank you, Professor Bedoya. And I have one more question for you. Sort of given the results of the polling, and to me, what was striking, just people are planning on voting, but like you said, it's sort of low information or sort of low uptake on sort of the information that's out there. What is sort of your call to action to folks on this call in terms of like motivating other folks to vote, but also what's your larger call to action? Because everyone loves to talk about polls, what they mean, what this means, and like prognosticating, forecasting, and that can have an effect on whether or not people decide they want to turn out to vote. So I'm also curious about your sort of call to action around that as well.
So my call to action is to really focus on your own networks. We know trusted messengers work. So if you are comfortable reaching out to your friends and your family and telling them that this election really matters, you should completely do that. If you're on Facebook or Instagram or any other social media and you post, "I voted," that proves that it works within your network. So just to lift up the importance of this election, lift up the real issues that are on the ballot and share that with the people that you're connected with, that can make a huge difference. We know from the 2018 campaign that even though historically midterm election turnout, 2014 was historically low for this country, there was a dramatic shift in 2018. And what shifted was that there was more conversation about the election. There was more of a sense of what was at stake. And when people understand what's on the ballot and what's at stake, and it's relatively easy for them to get that information from trusted sources, I think that's the other big challenge is people get so much information and contradictory information and they don't know what to trust, that then they're able to engage. And so that's why connecting with your friends, connecting with your families, kind of getting that word out and letting it grow exponentially is a very powerful way to just increase the amount of conversation that's happening around the election.
Great. Thank you so much, Professor Abidoyev. As always, it's always wonderful to conduct our own polls, like something we know this universe and with real intention to try to reach us, especially specific voters that usually get, as you mentioned, it's like overseen, overlooked by other polls. So thank you again so much for all of your insights and all of your analysis. And now with that, let's discuss some of what's actually on the ballot. So tonight, we're first going to hear from Onyema Obikia of Black Women for Wellness, who is one of the partners leading on Yes on Proposition 1. Of course, that's the proposition, again, to enshrine abortion and access to contraception into the California state constitution. Just quick background that Courage and Black Women for Wellness have long partnered on advocating for abortion and reproductive rights and engaging voters around the state and year-round as well. So Onyema, happy to welcome you onto our Power Hour for this evening.
Oops. Hi there, Irene, and good evening, everyone. Thank you very much again for having me. It's always a pleasure to join you all on your fabulous and phenomenal programs. I deeply cherish our partnership and grateful to continue the work. So good evening, everyone. My name is Onyema Obikia, and I am with Black Women for Wellness Action Project. We are a reproductive justice 501c4 committed to building the power of Black women and girls in an effort to secure their overall health and well-being in California. And so we do that through policy advocacy and electoral work. And so I'm happy to be here as proud endorsers of Yes on Prop 1 and proud steering committee member of the California Future of Abortion Council to share a little bit more about Prop 1. So as we've all seen, reproductive freedom is under attack across the country, from anti-abortion extremists to leaders who have made it clear that they would back a nationwide ban on abortion. Since the Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade, more than half of the country is facing an abortion ban. At least 16 states have already enacted bans, many of which have no exception for rape or incest. With additional bans currently being litigated or held up by courts in a few other states. As we saw, a few weeks back even, anti-abortion advocates are not satisfied and will continue to work to eliminate a woman and birthing person's right to reproductive autonomy. We saw Senator Lindsey Graham showed, with his introduction of a federal abortion ban, he illustrated just the extent and the lengths that these folks will go. We cannot rest on our laurels. California is working to ensure that the full spectrum of reproductive health care, which includes abortion, remains legal and accessible for all of its folks. California can't rely on the once long-standing federal protections anymore, and we must do what we can to ensure that our state has the strongest protections possible. Prop 1 is important and urgent because it will ensure that people have the freedom to make their own personal healthcare decisions based on scientific facts and what they deem is best for themselves and their families, not a political agenda. Access to affordable, comprehensive reproductive health care, including abortions, allows for people and families to plan their lives, achieve their dreams, and determine their reproductive destiny. This is a deeply personal choice and a decision that's outside of the realm of politics and religion. That's where it belongs, right? Yes, it's true that the state law already protects the right to abortion, but this proposition would create additional safeguards to help protect our rights. We can't rest on our laurels. I can't emphasize that enough. As progressive as California is, we can't ignore the unrelenting anti-abortion folks and their continued attempts to undermine and roll back our rights. We've seen this in recall efforts, right? All of this is connected. We've seen this in local efforts throughout California to ban access to abortion care in various cities. We simply cannot rest, right? We can't take anything for granted. If you had told us that Roe would be overturned, well, if you don't work in the reproductive health and rights space, right? No one would have guessed. that the court would have acted and acted in this way, the Supreme Court. So Prop 1 would ensure that access to abortion and contraception is protected from any future attacks by a later California Supreme Court or legislature that might have anti-choice ideologies. If a future legislature, for instance, took action to rescind the right to abortion, it would take a constitutional amendment requiring a 2/3 vote of the legislature to place it on the ballot, and then require a vote from voters, right, to repeal these rights, should Prop 1 and should abortion rights be enshrined in our Constitution. So without Prop 1, a future legislature could simply amend state statute, which requires a simple majority vote. Prop 1 would also subject our laws regulating abortion to more stringent level of constitutional review, ensuring that abortion is not singled out for burdensome, unjustified restrictions, right? That, other medical procedures aren't subject to. So regardless of who or what party controls the government or the courts in California, we need to ensure that all people's rights to an abortion is protected in California. It's essential that California continues to have the strongest laws in the nation so that we can continue again also to be a beacon of hope for those who may need to access care, this critical healthcare right and access to contraceptions. So this is my plea to you. I encourage you all to vote yes on Prop 1 to ensure that we have the strongest protections in California for our reproductive freedom and our reproductive choice. Thank you.
Thank you, Nyama. So I did say we were going to do Q&A after all the speakers, but whenever I hear you talk about this always feels me, I always feel compelled to sort of ask some questions. So it seems like Proposition 1 has a lot of support. So I'd love to hear from you. Right, like in other states, people really took the vote on abortion policies as sort of like the vanguard or read on things. So how important is it for us to have a really strong outpouring of support for Prop 1? And then my second question is, how are candidates who support Prop 1 in abortion and reproductive rights, how are they jointly campaigning or working Proposition 1 into their own campaigns?
Irene, you always come with the great questions. I love it and deeply appreciate it. And so let's see, I'll answer your second question first, mostly because I think I may have forgotten you first. The second question, how, like, the outpouring of support by candidates in California just really makes me super proud, right? Super grateful and super proud to live in California, a state where there is just tremendous amount of support, like our candidates get it, and are really coming out and standing in favor and support of Proposition 1 and they're hitting the streets, they're hosting phone banks, they're partnering with community-based organizations, they're coming to community forums and asking questions around Proposition 1, really studying up. And as a reproductive justice organization, I really deeply appreciate them even educating themselves around the framework of reproductive justice, and deepening their understanding around the intersectional issues that impact our reproductive decisions and our choices, right? And gaining a more expansive understanding of that framework. So they're doing a great job. They're talking to the right people, they're hosting events, and they're putting their weight behind getting this proposition passed. I think I remember your first question. So yes, right, like we can't take, like, it's important, right, that everybody votes for props.
Oh no. All right. So Onyema froze, as you all can see. I think I know where she was going with this, which is here in California and obviously in other states as well, it's important for us to not just pass Proposition 1, but to show that there is very strong opposition to this. Because even here in California, in different regions, we're definitely seeing candidates and campaigns going very hard in opposition of Prop 1. And the wider our margin of victory is on that proposition, the better chance we have at carving out space to keep expanding abortion protection and abortion rights here in California, and really rebuke the people who oppose that and who also, of course, are linked to some of the national efforts to continue to overturn abortion rights as well. So with that, thank you, Onyema, for joining us again tonight and for your work on this very important proposition. And as she mentioned, on the California Future Abortion Council, which was also behind passing a very significant slate of abortion protection bills here in California as well. So next, I want to invite Vinnie Eng with the Los Angeles County Yes on Measure A campaign to speak next. Again, quick context on that one. Courage has worked in partnership with many groups on electing and holding district attorneys and sheriffs more accountable. And Measure A was also co-introduced by Courage All-Star Supervisor Holly Mitchell with Supervisor Hilda Solis. And so, Vinnie, want to give you a spot on that as what I'm hoping a successful ballot measure, but also one that I'm hoping sets a standard for other counties to follow as well.
Thank you so much, Irene, and thank you everyone for allowing me to speak to Measure A tonight. My name is Vinnie Eng. I am a member of the Check the LA Sheriff Coalition. We are a group of impacted family members who have experienced police violence at the hands of the LA sheriffs. And for many years now, we have been in coalition with community-based organizations, service providers, as well as labor union leaders to bring real accountability to the LA Sheriff's Department. This department has had many decades of really troublesome record of a lack of civilian oversight and accountability. Measure A was authored by supervisors Holly Mitchell and Hilda Solis, and put on this November's ballot as an amendment to the county charter. Measure A, if passed by the County of Los Angeles voters, would authorize the removal of a sheriff by a 4/5 supermajority vote of the Board of Supervisors if the sheriff commits serious violations of public trust, which includes breaking the law, misusing funds, and or obstructing civilian oversight investigations. This is more than just about the current sheriff. This is about a legacy of corruption and violence, as well as enabling of deputy gangs in the LA Sheriff's Department that's been subject to a number of federal and state investigations across multiple sheriffs now. Former Sheriff Lee Baca is currently serving in jail for corruption. Current Sheriff Alex Villanueva has refused to fulfill subpoena requests by civilian oversight boards. In fact, most recently, as some of you may have seen in the news, the sheriff has obstructed Inspector General Max Huntsman's ability to be the civilian inspector general by blocking him out of all databases currently operated by the Sheriff's Department. And so Measure A is a really important change to the county charter because it allows for real-time accountability. We don't have to wait every 4 years for another election to pull the levers of civilian oversight. And so I would welcome you to consider supporting Measure A and telling all of your community members who support anti-corruption, anti-police violence, and real meaningful community oversight. We really need Measure A. There is nothing like this across the country. And if Los Angeles were to pass Measure A, it would really set a new standard for civilian oversight and bring real teeth to civilian oversight here in Los Angeles County and across California and hopefully across the country.
Thank you, Vinnie. I really appreciate that. Can you give me a sense too, Measure A also feels like this is a culmination of many years of Los Angeles organizers, again, like really trying to hold sheriffs and district attorneys accountable who, like what Jackie Lacey previously and now Villanueva, who really have not heeded the call or the demands for reform or for action on things. So can you say, how does this sort of measure speak to where LA is at, and especially within sort of like we saw in our poll, like people are very concerned about public safety. And so how does this sort of land within that broader context?
Thank you for that question, Irene. I think many of you are familiar with Measure J, which was an incredibly transformative proposition that requires that a certain percentage of the budget in LA be spent on meaningful community-based solutions that deliver real safety. We know that safety is not just a back-end solution after something bad has happened, but we have to invest in prevention. And, in the current climate of the weaponizing of law enforcement to advance political stunts, as we've seen in Florida and in Texas, it's really important that we stem the slide of fascism by corrupt elected officials who weaponize law enforcement to terrorize vulnerable populations in our communities. Los Angeles has been a leader in advancing real community-based solutions that deliver material benefits to people who are closest to harm. And, Measure A is the culmination of many families who have lost loved ones to police violence in Los Angeles. Every 8 days, someone in Los Angeles is killed by law enforcement. And in a stunning display of the lack of reckoning after the death of George Floyd, the rates of police violence continue to hold steady, if not increase, year over year. And we have to do things differently. And this requires real civilian oversight, where subpoenas are followed, and where we don't wait for the election before we hold an elected law enforcement official accountable for their decisions as leaders who absorb bloated budgets. Billions of dollars are spent on law enforcement solutions that have never delivered real safety. There are multiple investigations at the state and federal level of law enforcement agencies, and we really need to prevent this corruption from happening before another election cycle.
Thank you so much, Vinny. Thank you so much for joining us, and appreciate that extra context as well. I forgot to mention that Courage California has endorsed Measure A full-heartedly, so encourage folks in LA County to vote for Measure A. I also want to mention too that, of course, Courage California is in full support of Proposition 1 as well, and all of you who are California voters will have the chance to vote on that. So again, thank you, Vinny. So next, want to talk about some of the candidate races on the ballot. So Courage California has endorsed 23 candidates for the general election, most of whom are progressive champions running for state, Senate, and Assembly. So to talk about a really good example of sort of the slate of endorsed candidates we have this year, I want to bring on Sky Allen of IE United, who you heard we partner with on our congressional polling. And she's going to talk about Corey Jackson running in Assembly District 60 in Riverside County. He faces a Republican in one of the many open seats this cycle. Sky, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much, Irene, for inviting me. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Sky Allen. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the program director with Inland Empire United. And I'm really excited to talk about Corey Jackson and his race in Assembly District 60, because he's been a friend of ours for a few years now. Now, Dr. Corey Jackson, he just finished his PhD. He's been a leader in the community, specifically in this community, the Greater Moreno Valley and Paris area, for over 15 years. He's a youth pastor. He's the CEO of a nonprofit organization. He's one of the leaders of the Riverside NAACP. He's been on our board for about a year now, and since 2020, he's been a member of the Riverside Board of Education, the County Board of Education. So he's and these are just like some of the top things on his resume. It's quite long, but he's deeply committed to the community that he works in. It's the community that he lives in. And he's really been showing up year after year, project after project, in this area and beyond, to show up for community members, to engage folks, to ensure that their needs are heard and addressed. Really committed to working with children around mental health after the pandemic. We've like connected with him around census and redistricting, and he's always there to answer a phone call. So we're just really excited to see that a community leader like Corey is now in the pipeline to join the state legislature, right? This is not just someone who checks off boxes and says the right things, but someone who's been on the ground doing the work for years, who has deep relationships. And those are the sort of candidates that we would love to see represent our communities, because we know that their hearts are in the right place and that they have the connections to check in with folks about, are people feeling this? Is this directed to the right people? What are the right solutions? Is there feedback you have for me, to really build those sorts of relationships? So we're really excited to see him running for assembly. We feel really good about his race right now, and are hopeful that in about a month we'll be able to call him Assembly Member Corey Jackson. But I'm happy to take any questions about him or any of the other races in the IE, because we're following a couple and excited about a few. But the IE is here. We're a part of the progressive fight too, and I'm really excited that he can help be a part of that, lead that charge.
Thank you, Sky. So as you mentioned too, there's a bunch of other races happening in the Inland Empire. I do want to say though, really quickly, I mean, Inland Empire, I would argue, hasn't necessarily been well represented in the state legislature, because you have some folks in the state Senate and state assembly who are definitely on the more moderate or, very corporate aligned Democrats. So what do you feel like Corey sort of means for you in terms of, like, what does that mean about how the region is changing, and sort of what representation people really are sort of demanding and really deserve there?
Absolutely. No, it's a great point. I think we've had a few like really incredible leaders, like Senator Connie Leyva, and Assembly Majority Leader Eloise Gomez Reyes, but there are more folks that maybe we have quibbles with and we feel truly represented by, unfortunately. But I feel, especially after redistricting, and we were deeply in part of the redistricting this time around, right? And there was leaders that were a part of the conversation and moving things forward in 2011, but we had more time to prepare, and to really be a part of the conversations and ensuring that districts were representative of the communities this time around. And I think we're really seeing candidates that reflect those communities well, because the pools of people that are in those districts are more aligned with how people identify and feel inside the communities. So I think we're seeing and we're feeling a lot of momentum to get more grassroots, to get more community driven, to be a little bit more creative about how we're approaching solutions, and be a little bit more resistant to maybe who we're getting influenced by, what sort of money we're taking in our campaigns, the way in which we're talking to voters. So I think there's just a lot of space for creativity, for innovation, for new leaders to step up. And that's really exciting. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, definitely. And then one last question, because I am sort of curious, what other races or candidates are you keeping an eye on in the region and that you're really excited about? Because I do feel like people have a sense, like folks in LA or the Bay Area sometimes make news statewide or nationally, and people are sort of sleeping on the Inland Empire as a region that could really be leading. And I think, you and I have talked about how, Amazon is really significant there. And so Inland Empire has a chance to lead on, again, really big issues that impact a whole lot of people. And so I'd love to hear what other candidates and races you're thinking about too.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of energy at the state and national level in Riverside this year. In addition to Corey Jackson running in 8060 to represent Reno Valley and Paris area, there's also Christy Holstage running in the Palm Springs area for assembly there, and then Fazia Rivzi in the other side of Riverside, more in the Corona area, running to be their assembly member. So those are all candidates that we're really excited to see run for state legislature. There's also Congressional District 41, which is currently has Congressman Ken Calvert there. He's been the incumbent for 30 years there. That district has gotten really tight, and there is a possibility that a new Congress member could step into the role if there's enough energy in the community this time around, and there might be. So we're keeping a really close eye and watching that race really closely to see what happens there, because that's one of the few Republican districts in California that may no longer be after this year if people show up for Will Rollins. So that would be really exciting and be a really, really big deal for the whole country, but also California and the Inland Empire to be part of that switch. And then of course there's so many local candidates. There's a lot of school board candidates that we're following and supporting because we understand how unfortunately polarized and political that those have become when they really shouldn't be. It should stay about the children, and it's not really been that way for the past few years. So we're excited to hopefully recenter those races around candidates that are educators, that are parents, that want to think about innovative ways to support children of all races and all backgrounds. So we're really excited there, but there's just a lot of energy in the IE, and I'm really excited to get the chance to uplift some of those candidates. And feel free to check out our website for other endorsees if you're curious about what we're following.
Thank you, Sky. I just want to underscore that like 100 times, right? Because I think what makes the news is people are very focused on control of the House, but we're also talking about expanding a progressive majority in our state legislature. And these, the candidates that Sky mentioned, Corey, Christy Fulseth, Fauzia, these are all really strong progressives. Like I'd be proud to have them represent me here in the Bay Area as well. I mean, these are really good people. And I think I've gotten more excited about this year and this slate of progressive candidates than I have in the past, because they're just really, really good. And there's a lot to be excited about. So thank you so much, Sky. Thank you again for all your work. I know you are very busy with a lot of field campaigns happening there. So I encourage folks, if you have any questions to any of our speakers, to please put them in the chat. I'm going to keep us moving because we have a couple other things that we want to share, especially some voter resources from the Courage team. I want to thank our presenters. And then next, I want to bring on my colleague, Jay Chodermal. He is our senior communications and voter engagement manager. And he's going to speak to some of the nonpartisan C3 tools that Courage has developed around the election, but also for year-round engagement of voters and constituents. Jay?
Thank you, Irene, and hello, everyone. I'm Jay Chardemal, and as Irene mentioned, I'm going to take a moment to show you all the resources and tools that are available to you on our Institute website. So let me try to share my screen. All right, so this is our Institute's website, couragecaliforniainstitute.org. So our Institute provides everything that someone needs to get involved and stay involved in the political process. We offer everything a voter needs, from voter registration tools so that folks can check their voter registration status, get their friends registered to vote, families registered to vote. We also have a blog that covers what is on your ballot, proposition-wise, as well as other useful information in terms of how to interact with the progressive movement, with the movement in general, as well as government information that is helpful for you to get in touch with your representatives to express what is important to you and your communities. Furthermore, we have linked to very useful tools that our Secretary of State offers us. So right here is the Secretary of State's ballot tracker. So if you sign up for the ballot tracker, this will allow you to know once your ballot is mailed to you, as well as once you mail your ballot back, once it is received by your county registrar and counted. I highly recommend everyone use this ballot tracker. The text messages come right to your phone. It's super, super helpful. We also have how to vote pages on our website. So these how to vote pages, we cover all of California's 58 counties. And on each page, what you'll find are vote by mail information, as well as links to your county's ballot drop box locations, your in-person voting options, information on accessible voting, as well as provisional voting, and all the contact information you need for your local county registrar. We also have important dates that are useful for Californians for the voting process. And lastly, we offer questions to frequently asked voting questions. So The questions that we cover are what happens if you miss the voter registration deadline, so same-day voter registration information, what to do if you're displaced from your home but still want to vote in the election, as well as accommodations for folks with accessibility needs. So a bunch of information on our institute, and we encourage you all to visit it as you are navigating the voting process. And if you have any questions that are not included or answered on our C3 website, please reach out to institute@couragecampaign.org and we will get those answered for you. Irene, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Jay. And Marianne had a question in the chat about signature issues on the ballot. I don't know if you have a response to that or if you have a resource to send folks to regarding that.
Let me take a look at Marion's question and I'll follow up with her in the chat.
Okay.
Sorry,
great.
I didn't see it because
No worries. All good. I know sharing screen takes up the whole thing. All right. So thank you so much, Jay. I also want to again point folks again to that Know Your Power blog that has information about all the propositions. It also has some explainers about how our state legislature works. And then we'll have some upcoming blogs about what's happening with the Supreme Court of the United States as well, with some very important and as always consequential decisions to be made. So really quickly, hang on. One child is calling. All right, thank you so much. Appreciate your patience on that. Had a separate Q&A happening on the side here. All right, so last thing I want to share with folks too, of course, as you heard Professor Bedoya mention up at the top, right? There's a lot of folks who really want to vote, but don't have the information that they need to vote. And so what I want to share with you today is our Courage Voter Guide, which we launched just, what day is today? 18th, just last week. So every year since 2020, Courage has put out a voter guide, and actually longer than that. But since 2020, we have put out a voter guide that covers all of the congressional races, all the state legislative races, all the statewide ballot measures, and a lot of local ballot measures and races that we identify and source from our partners. So with this general election voter guide, we have covered over 200 races and ballot measures up and down the ballot. And in each race, we try to provide a recommendation or endorsement for a candidate and give folks context and information as to why some folks are better choices than others. And we also want to highlight what money is behind the candidates as well. So folks know when they're voting for somebody, who these candidates are going to be beholden to when they get to Sacramento or City Hall or to the House. I also want to mention too, one thing that's really become of a lot more importance and priority for us too, especially on statewide propositions and ballot measures, is we have dedicated sections on misinformation and countering misinformation. As you guys know, you've probably been flooded with a lot of ads about Prop 26 and Prop 27, Prop 29. There's a lot. And so our voter guide is really meant to help people sort of wade through all that information and really understand what a yes vote means or what a no vote means. So you'll see here that we cover all the statewide races here and then local races as well. And then as you scroll down, you have the ability to then customize your guide based on where you live throughout the state. And then from there, you can take a look at what positions we've taken on House races, state legislative races, etc. So in 2020 for the general election, we reached about 600,000 voters throughout the state of California with our voter guide. And in this June 7th, the primary election, we reached over 100,000 voters. And of real importance, like Professor Bedoya mentioned, about half of those voters were voters between the ages of 18 to 35. So a really critical band of voters right now. So our goal this election cycle for this general election is to reach over 500,000 voters. Because as we know, on some local races, hundreds of votes or even thousands of votes will make a difference. And in some House races in recent years, we've even seen a few hundred votes make the difference between a Democrat and Republican. So it's really important for us to get our voter guide in front of as many people as possible. So a couple of things I just want to highlight. As I mentioned, we endorsed a slate of 23 candidates up and down the ballot. And so there's a tab specifically dedicated so you can see who we endorsed for the general election. I also want to point out too, by request of a lot of voters and followers, we also produce downloadable voter guides. So we wanted to come up with voter guides that would make it easier for people to print them out, just be able to vote right next to their ballot. And we also wanted to put out a version of our voter guide that was a lot more friendly towards people who don't speak English as their first language. So again, trying to get the voter guide to as many people as possible. So the voter guide, I want to say, is live, and I encourage you to share the voter guide widely with as many people as possible. And look at your races. Again, we've got some really fascinating candidates up and down the ballot, and a lot of great ballot measures, and some obviously not so great ones that we need to just be really informed by. So that's it for tonight. Again, want to thank you all for joining us tonight. And I have one final question to you all as we sort of close out. I definitely want to hear from folks as you're looking at your ballot. What race or ballot measure are you most excited to vote for? So if you can share that in the chat, love to see that. Hopefully they'll line up with some of the endorsements we made for tonight. I do want to thank all of our presenters that we had on tonight, Professor Lisa Garcia Bedoya from Data for Social Good, Onyema Obikia from Black Women for Wellness Action Project, Vinnie Eng from Check the LA Sheriff and the Yes on Measure A campaign in Los Angeles County, and Sky Allen with IE United. I also want to thank our ASL interpreters tonight, Dresden Lamar and Gabi Cerda from Pro Bono ASL. And lastly, of course, I want to thank all of you for joining our Power Hour event. I am both very, very nervous about this election, but also very excited because I know no matter what, we're going to have some really incredible wins to celebrate on the other side. And fingers crossed, if we all do our work and turn out the vote and turn out our family and friends to vote, we'll have even more wins to celebrate. I also want to encourage you also to follow Courage California, look at what we're doing. This Power Hour event really kicks off what we call our week of action. And so we're really encouraging folks, make sure people in your network are registered to vote, have their ballot, use our voter guide, return their ballot. Really want to make sure, again, we get historic turnout because we know that's what it is going to get us the wins that we need for this 2022 general election. With that, I want to thank you all so much tonight. Have a good night. See you on the other side of the election when we hopefully have a lot of wins to celebrate. Thank you for your engagement tonight, and thank you for voting in this really important election. Good night, everyone.
Mai, can you make me the host real quick?
Yes.